It's a pleasure to be with you. The title of this talk is Boundary Spanning Leadership and Identity, Session 3. There are no disclosures for this presentation. Objectives include discuss the importance of group identity in the boundary spanning process, review the role of cultural dimensions, class, status, and roles, and community memberships as related to identity, discuss how perceptions of dominant and non-dominant groups influence identity and divides, review the importance of relationship strength in boundary spanning work, discuss basic intergroup relationship building techniques, and emphasize the importance of balance between differentiation and integration for effective boundary spanning. Knowing and accepting who we are, our identity, as a leader and a group or community is essential in boundary spanning work. There are many factors that form our identity. Boundary spanning leadership focuses on two major categories: a leader's and group's needs for differentiation or uniqueness, and needs for integration and belonging or acceptance into a group or community. Differentiation factors may include cultural dimensions, class, status, and roles, and community memberships. Differentiation, knowing and accepting who we are, can significantly contribute to self-esteem and security, providing confidence to interact with people who are different from us. So knowing and accepting who we are, our identity, as a leader and a group or community is an essential initial step in boundary spanning work. Let's briefly talk about the 7 dimensions that help define the cultural distance between groups. The more one group or culture X differs from another group or culture Y, in these 7 dimensions defines the cultural distance between them and also describes their uniqueness or differentiation. Those 7 dimensions include worldview or deep beliefs that informs the way a culture perceives the world around them, cognitive processes or ways of thinking, linguistic forms or ways of expressing ideas, behavioral patterns or ways of acting, social structures or ways of interacting. Social structures also refer to the relationships we have with others, a critical factor in boundary spanning. Media influence, or ways of channeling messages, and motivational resources, or ways of deciding. More detailed discussions of these 7 dimensions are covered in other sessions of the North Dakota Public Health Training Network. Let's now consider how class, status, and roles impact differentiation and uniqueness. All societies and communities express elements of class, status, and roles. Class is defined as a continuum between open and closed. Open societies allow relative ease of communicating and moving between classes versus closed societies. The United States and England would be considered open societies, where India and Spain are more closed. Generally, there are 3 social classes in each community: upper, middle, and lower. Class is associated with certain behavioral expectations and is fairly well defined. For example, a person living in a certain part of town may be associated with a certain social class. Certain jobs may be associated with class. For example, a physician or lawyer may be considered upper class in some communities, where other jobs may be associated with the middle or lower social classes. Class expectations help define the identity of individuals and groups. Superimposed on the class system is a status system and roles. Status is the social position assigned or achieved by an individual. Role is the acting out of one's status. Every member of a society or community has his or her statuses and roles. A man may have the status of son to his mother, physician to his patients, and elder in the church. In each of these statuses, a person is expected to fulfill certain roles or behaviors. These statuses and roles of individuals and a group's members inform identity or differentiation and uniqueness. Class and status also help identify the dominant or in-groups from the non-dominant or out-groups. Psychologists have demonstrated that human beings naturally and unconsciously categorize themselves and others into in-groups and out-groups. Some of that categorization comes from class and status, but it's also influenced by initial impressions. Humans make snap decisions about others all the time, and many of those snap judgments are wrong. We generally attach halos around those of our in-group, assigning them positive qualities and bias. They're like us. They have similar beliefs, values, institutions, and behaviors. Our group's beliefs and values are obviously the correct and best beliefs and values. Anyone with different beliefs and values are obviously wrong. With this concept in mind, it shouldn't surprise us that leaders and managers tend to hire people who are like themselves, therefore limiting access to diverse perceptions and ideas that can move organizations toward new horizons. Leaders are almost always in the dominant or in-group of an organization. If not, they've got a big problem. Non-dominant individuals live as outsiders and are acutely aware of the boundaries or barriers associated with being an outsider. Dominant group members, on the other hand, have difficulty understanding what it's like to be in the non-dominant or out group. Dominant or in groups generally don't perceive boundaries or barriers within their organizations. The in group is the majority group. This is the group with the most power and voice. This difference in barrier reality and perception between the dominant and non-dominant groups impacts the identity of the groups and can, if not appropriately managed, create great divides. I would like to summarize a report of a 1960s exercise utilized on third graders in Riceville, Iowa, to demonstrate the potential negative power of identity differences and how it can quickly cause a great divide even among friends. This report was detailed in Boundary Spanning Leadership. A grade school teacher, Jane Elliott, was troubled by racist remarks from a variety of leaders after the death of Martin Luther King Jr. She remembered the Sioux Indian prayer that says, "O Great Spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked in his moccasins." She thought it was time for her grade school students to learn what it was like to do that. Riceville was essentially a white community. Therefore, she felt just talking about racial differences would have little impact. So she decided to create a classroom situation to better illustrate how racial discrimination works and how it can cause a great divide. On April 5th, 1968, Jane announced to her students that blue-eyed people were better than brown-eyed people. They were smarter, cleaner, and better behaved, and therefore would get privileges like extra lunch food and more recess time. The brown-eyed children had to wear felt collars around their necks and were not allowed to drink out of the same water fountain as the blue-eyed children. Brown-eyed children couldn't play on the swings at recess and had to wait to use the bathroom until all of the blue-eyed children had their turn. A great divide opened immediately between the groups. Note that this happened in children who were previously friends in a small rural community. Blue-eyed children became bossy and arrogant. Brownies, as they were quickly labeled by the blue-eyed children, became timid, depressed, angry, and belligerent. One of the brown-eyed children hit his blue-eyed friend in the stomach when he was called a brownie. a brown-eyed girl during recess, huddled in a corner because she wasn't allowed to play on the playground equipment with the blue-eyed children. A blue-eyed boy gave a teacher a pointer and suggested that she use it to hit the brown-eyed children if they got out of line. The academic performance of the brown-eyed children in class activities dropped dramatically. The next day, Jane turned the tables, saying she was wrong. The truth was that the brown-eyed children were more intelligent and well-behaved and therefore would receive special privileges. The blue-eyed children were made to wear the collars, much to the pleasure of the brown-eyed group. The brown-eyed children quickly assumed a superior attitude as roles reversed. Academic performance of the brown-eyed children returned to pre-experiment levels immediately. The experiment ended after the second day, and Jane told the children to think about this exercise when they interact with someone who has different colored skin, and what it felt like when they were treated badly because of their eye color. Identity differences, particularly between dominant and non-dominant groups, must be managed appropriately by leaders when boundary spanning, or it can result in the enhancement of differences, increasing the divide between the groups. A few comments about communities and how they relate to differentiation and uniqueness. Community membership helps define our uniqueness, but also helps us meet our needs for integration and belonging. A community and community engagement doesn't always fit the geopolitical definition used commonly in public health. A community engagement expert would likely define a community using two major criteria. First, knowing each other by first name. This usually means that a true community is limited to 1,000 to 1,500 people, which is approximately the maximum number of people a person can know by first name. The second criteria for community engagement is that the group must demonstrate a sense of shared responsibility for each other. People may know each other by first name but have no concern for each other's welfare. An example of this could be individuals living in an apartment complex, knowing each other by name but having no other connection or commitment. Communities can be divided into 5 major groups, including small rural towns that meet the community definition, faith-based groups, workplaces, schools. Schools are complex, composed of several sub-communities based on staff, students, further stratified by homeroom, class, school organizations, etc. The last group of communities is other organizations that meet the community definition, including ethnic groups, street children, prostitutes, Knights of Columbus, Rotary, Optimists, sororities, fraternities, social media groups, etc. Most, if not all, individuals belong to multiple communities. A person may live in a rural town, belong to a church, work in a local business, belong to the PTA, and be a member of the Rotary Club. Each of these groups may meet the definition of a community. Each of these communities inform who we are, help define our uniqueness, and also impact our beliefs, values, and ultimately our behaviors. More detailed discussion of these communities is covered in other sessions of the North Dakota Public Health Training Network. So there are many factors like cultural dimensions, class status and roles, and membership in communities that form a unique differentiation matrix or profile for individuals. These unique individual profiles in aggregate influence and define the groups they belong to. Uniqueness can cause suspicion and distrust. It can easily separate groups into us and them, causing a great divide. Boundaries are changing in our world. As traditional geographic and technical boundaries diminish, others, involving human relationships, move to the forefront for leaders and their organizations. This slide lists the 5 major boundaries identified in boundary spanning leadership, including vertical boundaries between hierarchical strata of organizations, horizontal boundaries between units, functional groups, divisions, and programs in organizations, stakeholder boundaries with customers and suppliers, demographic boundaries in working with diverse groups, and geographic boundaries associated with distance and regions. Initially, leaders must clearly identify areas of overlap, areas of common priorities, goals, needs, values, etc., since these are the areas that participating organizations or groups will invest time, personnel, and other resources in to accomplish. This is a great safe place to start a collaborative relationship. The partnership must result in a win-win for all partners. This may mean compromising on certain areas of disagreement to move the relationship forward. The extreme concept of every organization for itself, maximizing individual organizational interests at the expense of the interests of external partners, undermines boundary-spanning collaborations and partnerships. This area of common goals and initial collaboration allows for the development of trust, respect, and a relationship that can weather the adaptive challenges of new horizons or frontiers. Appropriate relationship strength helps move the us versus them to we as a collaborative group. Relationships take time. Moving too fast into adaptive situations before relationships, respect, and trust are well established will likely result in failure. Enhance the human element. Get to know each other personally across the boundaries of collaborative groups. Arranging regular social gatherings or events outside the workplace in a neutral space is often a valuable approach. Encourage regular personal networks beyond the immediate circle of organization coworkers to encourage interaction and relationship development with individuals from other groups. Use more face-to-face interactions, particularly early in the relation building process. Physical person-to-person meetings are likely better than video conferencing, though that is not always possible. Face-to-face interactions are important for developing relationships. Other techniques to enhance relationships and build effective collaborations include identify and stay within the safe place of common goals while relationships are being developed. Clear bidirectional communications are essential. Avoid one group dominating the other group. All partners are co-equals. Utilize active listening. Bidirectional active listening helps both groups understand positions, provides plausible insights, ideas, and solutions. Regular contact via meetings and communications. This helps keep collaborative members thinking about collaborative opportunities versus slipping back into their silos. Purposeful meetings. Leaders need to identify appropriate and realistic agenda items, focusing on common win-win goals for the collaborative group that particularly address the consumer versus organizational structures. Leadership must appropriately cast shared vision. The collaborative group must have appropriate representation from each group. The more upper-level leadership participation, the more successful the collaborative group will be. A leader can't always delegate representation to others and expect a successful collaborative outcome. Once adequate strength of relationships, trust, and respect are established, the groups can reset collaborative boundaries to enter new frontiers that include new wins for each partner. These new wins can only be accomplished by the partners or groups working together. Interdependence of partners is essential to accomplish these new wins. If these new wins can be accomplished by participating organizations or groups by themselves, then the partnership is not needed. Boundary-spanning leaders must have the skills and judgment to identify common goals, clarify significant win-wins for all partners, develop relationship strength, and judge when that relationship is strong enough to weather adaptive challenges, and then facilitate the group to identify new wins, motivating them to expand boundaries to new frontiers. There are incredible opportunities, but also significant risks of failure for boundary-spanning leaders. Boundary-spanning leadership is not for the faint of heart. A basic concept of community engagement is in its definition. Community engagement is facilitating a process of problem solving, not just accomplishing a project. This concept applies to boundary-spanning work between collaborative partners. A boundary-spanning leader should encourage the collaborative to first address solvable problems within that area of overlap, the area of common goals. This is the area of low-hanging fruit for collaborative work. An initial success will encourage the collaborative to move toward more difficult adaptive problems and eventually to new frontiers. An initial failure can demoralize partners and discourage further collaborative work. I want to reemphasize that a boundary-spanning leader needs to realize that he or she is facilitating a process of problem solving, not just accomplishing a project. A major point in boundary-spanning leadership is finding the appropriate balance between differentiation and integration for the collaboration. The leader must define and strengthen boundaries enough to meet the needs of differentiation and uniqueness in the groups, a safe space of security, knowing and accepting the participating group's individual identities. The leader must also know the appropriate time and pace to span those boundaries to meet the needs of the groups for integration and belonging. Further discussion of boundary-spanning concepts is covered in other sessions of the North Dakota Public Health Training Network curricula. In summary, clarifying identity or differentiation is an important initial step in boundary-spanning work. Differentiation factors to consider include cultural dimensions, class status and roles, and community memberships. If not managed well, differentiation can exacerbate the Great Divide. Appropriate relationship strength is essential for boundary-spanning work. Collaborative work must start around win-win solvable goals for each collaborative partner and progress from there to new collaborative frontiers. A boundary-spanning leader must find the appropriate balance between differentiation or uniqueness and integration or belonging between collaborating groups.